Welcome to another episode of Daniel Goes Outside. I'm currently on my way to the Calgary International Airport, and I am going to Silver Springs, Maryland, to go to World of EUC Independence. It is the first EUC related conference. It is the second tech conference I'm going to this year, and I think it should be a lot of fun. I have never been to Maryland, and I have also never been to Silver Springs. I have finally arrived in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I have gotten checked into my hotel, and holy smokes was it an adventure to get here. The morning kind of started off with a text from Air Canada being like, hey, by the way, your flight is delayed by 2 hours. The original plan was that the flight would go from Calgary to Montreal, and then from Montreal to Washington, and everything seems to go to Washington because Washington's only like 30 minutes away from Maryland, so it's not that bad. And I guess Maryland doesn't have any like airports, or if they do, there's no like direct flights from anywhere to it. But regardless, the problem is that the connecting flight from Montreal to Washington, there was only like a 90-minute layover, and the flight from Calgary to Montreal was already delayed by 2 hours. So it was going to be like impossible to make the connecting flight. Unfortunately, I was traveling with my friend Steven, and he is super experienced in dealing with flight delays and all of that. So we decided to go to the airport super early, and he was talking to Air Canada, and fortunately he was able to get our flights changed so that instead of going Calgary to Montreal, we went Calgary to Toronto, and then from Toronto to Maryland, and well, not Maryland, but to Washington, and we were able to make it on time. It is currently 11:33 Maryland time, which I think is Eastern time. Anyways, it's not the same time as Calgary time. Also, I'm really bad at time zone math. On the flight from Calgary to Toronto, we actually got free food, and there was two options. I forget what the second option was, but the option I chose was the butter chicken option, and it was really good. Like, I don't understand why there's this entire premise around airplane food being so bad. This is the first time that I've ever had food on an airplane, and it wasn't bad. I've always been like hesitant to try it because everyone says airplane food is terrible, but like, this wasn't bad. So like, why? Tomorrow will be day one of EUC World Independence, and there is going to be a bunch of different talks that I'm going to attend and learn a ton about the entire EUC space. If you're not familiar with the EUC space, EUC stands for End User Computing. It essentially is any kind of computing thing that like end users touch, like Intune, Horizon, Citrix, Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, all that kind of stuff, and all the technologies that make all of that work is considered EUC. And World of EUC, which is the independent organization that is putting on this event, is an independent entity outside of all of the brands that are there. Like, you have VMware Explorer, which is all VMware focused, and when Omnissa Horizon was still part of VMware, that would have fallen into the VMware Explorer, but since Horizon has split off from VMware and is now its own independent company called Omnissa, everything is kind of its own, and it kind of left this gap where there's no like EUC convention, and that's where World of EUC decided to kind of fill in that gap and create a convention that is independent of, not really a convention, but like create an organization that is independent from all of like the brands that are there, so that it could survive, and just not so that it could survive, but it's so that it could like unite all the different technologies that make up the entire EUC space, because there are a lot of different technologies that make it up. And now there is an independent organization that kind of unites all of that. And this is their tech conference. This is the very first tech conference that they've done. I don't know if there's been other EUC tech conferences, but this is the first EUC tech conference I've been to. This is the first one that World of EUC is doing, and it should be a heck of a lot of fun. I am very excited for it. Today there is some lens flare. Ooh, look at this. Look at that lens flare. It's like Star Trek by J.J. Abrams. Today is day one of EUC World Independence, and I am going to go meet up with Steven because there is free breakfast, and we're gonna go do that. Oh, and I'm wearing my fancy Omnissa Tech Insider shirt that I got for being an Omnissa Tech Insider, which is like the VMware vExpert program, but for the Omnissa side of things, which is the old VMware EUC division, which is now their own independent company called Omnissa. And I happen to be one of the Tech Insiders, which is the like rebrand of the EUC experts. For day one, there's going to be a bunch of talks and panels and stuff. There's not as much choice as there was in VMware Explorer, so I haven't really dived too deep into what all of the panels are and the talks are, because I'm just gonna go to them and kind of wing it and see how things go. After breakfast, I'm gonna get to go signed in and get my badge and all that kind of fun stuff. If there was pre-registration yesterday, well, I don't actually know, but it doesn't matter because my flight got in as late as it did and I would have missed it. This is my EUC World Independence badge. Well, day one of EUC World Independence has now come to a close. And holy smokes, day one was just a jam-packed day. Day one took place at the AFI Silver Theater, which I keep wanting to make the joke about AFI and Miss Murder, but like, the AFI has many other songs, but that's the only one that comes to the top of my head. But like, the theater name has nothing to do with the band AFI. I also am curious what AFI actually stands for, and I'm not sure, but it's not the same AFI as the band. At the AFI Silver Theater, there was a bunch of different keynote sessions all about the entire EUC space and the various things that are there. Some of them, one of them was like the history of like EUC, and not really the history, but like the evolution of EUC over the years, which is actually really cool to see. And there was a couple of vendor kind of keynote spotlights, whatever the heck you want to call them, about their various products. And oh, even before the day actually began, just first thing in the morning, on the way to the event, I actually ran into Holly, who is from the Omnissa team that is in charge of the Tech Insiders, also known as the EUC experts, which is what its old name is. It was rebranded to Tech Insiders. I ran into her for the first time, who I've only spoken to online, which was actually really cool to finally meet her in person. Another really funny thing that kept happening to me, I swear it happened like 5 different times, because of my Omnissa Tech Insider shirt, people kept thinking that I was an Omnissa employee, and I'm not, but everyone kept thinking I worked at Omnissa, and I was like, no, this is the Tech Insider shirt. And yeah, it was actually really funny because it happened more than once. One of the really neat vendors that I spoke to was Liquidware, because they have this product that is like FS Logics and also like app volumes, where like you can attach and like put applications on like physical systems, but not actually like install the application. I'm not fully 100% clear on how it fully works, but it was really interesting. The other really cool part is that they have these user profiles that kind of work like how FS Logics works, but it can have multiple users attached to it. So what I mean by that is like you can have an RDS session host that is hosting an application, and then you could even have that same user logged into a VDI system or a physical system. And with FS Logics, as far as I am aware, you can only have that user connected read and write to one user profile container. But with Liquidware's configuration, you can actually have the same user on multiple different devices, and everything will sync up, which is really, really cool. I want to play with that more. Some of the vendors also had some really interesting swag, like Tenzig had this fancy like light up pen, which is pretty cool. Tenzig was also giving out Repurpose OS flash drives, which if you don't know what Tenzig is or what Repurpose OS is, both Tenzig products and Repurpose OS is effectively thin clients for connecting to your VDI environment. Now, Repurpose OS is really interesting because it allows you to effectively install Repurpose OS on older systems. Like, these systems don't need to be powerful. These things could be like Chromebooks. These things could just be things that don't actually support Windows 11. And you can actually install this on them, and then you can manage it with like the Tenzig manager, and then effectively the systems either being the systems being Tenzig clients or Tenzig thin clients or Repurpose OS devices, you can just use that to connect to your VDI infrastructure, which is really cool. And now that I have a repurposed OS flash drive, I now have the ability to play with this and see more about how this works. So I'm really excited to play with that. Another neat thing that one of the vendors was giving away was something that Control Up was giving away, which is like this robot kind of guy, but it's like a transformer that can just change into different shapes, which I think is actually really cool. Lots of vendors also had really cool things. These are just the ones I wanted to highlight. Something that I learned today is that you can actually make a PowerShell GUI for your scripts using XAML or WPF. Those might actually be the same thing. I'm not fully sure. I do need to read more about that. But you can make a GUI for your PowerShell scripts, which I think is really, really cool. An interesting tool I learned about today is a tool called Evergreen. And what's interesting with Evergreen is that Evergreen will download applications for the purpose of packaging them with your VDI solution and injecting them into your golden image so that you can always have an always current download of like Zoom and Office and stuff like that. The part that I found that is really funny with that is I have effectively, without even knowing that Evergreen exists, written the exact same scripts or very similar scripts. I haven't actually looked at what the PowerShell scripts look like for Evergreen, but I have written scripts that do the same functionality in PowerShell for Intune application deployment. I don't actually know if you can use Evergreen with Intune application deployment, but I do find it really funny that in total kind of oblivion, whoever created Evergreen and then my scripts were created without knowing that each other's scripts existed and were kind of created to accomplish similar goals. I think that's really neat. One of the sessions I attended today was about automating the Windows image creation for Azure Virtual Desktop. And that session's presenter had a challenge to the audience called Stump the Chump, where effectively they wanted the audience to ask them a question that they could not answer. And well, I asked them a question that they could not answer. Their entire framework for creating a Windows image for deployment to Azure Virtual Desktop relied very heavily on the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, MDT, and the problem that I saw with it is the entire reason why I've been pushing to internally switch away from SCCM into Intune is because MDT doesn't actually officially support Windows 11. Yes, you can make it work. Yes, it probably will work for a while, but it will eventually break. My biggest concern is the fact that the SMTP service in Windows Server was deprecated in Server 2020, or not 2020, but in Server 2012 R2, I think it was, or maybe it was Server 2012. Regardless, it finally broke in Server 2022. In Server 2019 it works, but in Server 2022 it does not. So my main fear is that if I rely heavily on the MDT and Microsoft has deprecated it, well then one day it's gonna break and it's not gonna work and then I'm gonna be stuck. So I don't want to use MDT. So that's why I asked the question, how are they handling the fact that Microsoft has deprecated MDT specifically for Windows 11 and future versions? And they didn't have an answer. And because they didn't have an answer, they paid me $20, which is what, $40 Canadian? Not actually, but still. But genuinely, my question wasn't trying to stump them. I was hoping that they had an answer that I didn't know, because I would love to use the MDT, but I can't, because I know it will eventually break. Maybe Microsoft will reverse course and make it so that it's no longer deprecated. Who knows? But as it stands right now, officially on paper in the Microsoft documentation, MDT is not officially supported with Windows 11. And there's really no signs that they are going to support it, but you never know. So I don't want to rely on a solution that relies so heavily on MDT. Well, that effectively brings day one to a close. It was a heck of a lot of fun. Today is day 2 of EUC World Independence, and on day 2, there's going to be a bunch of regular sessions, and then there will also be what they call an unconference, which is effectively a bunch of talks that the community is able to submit, and some of those will be selected for those community members to give presentations on. EUC World Independence is now fully completed, and holy smokes, the overall event was a heck of a lot of fun. Today there was a bunch of talks that were keynote sessions and a couple of vendor presentations, and then they had what they call the unconference, which is just community people that submitted ideas to do talks about and that the attendees voted on. One of the really interesting things was that there was a home lab panel, which was really cool because I went to check that out, and it was all of us comparing our server rack sizes and just talking about different things that we have done with our home labs and how we have figured some stuff out, and just talking about home labs in general. That panel was a heck of a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that one. Also, one of the attendees that was at the event works at Axon. And if you don't know what Axon is the company that makes the body cameras for the police and other first responders and stuff like that. What's really interesting is the device itself. I thought it was like kind of like a GoPro where it just like records to an SD card and something kind of like that. I didn't put too much thought into how it works. What's really interesting is that it actually like runs Linux on it, and all of the data is encrypted. It also has USB-C, but if you were to plug in the device to a computer, you wouldn't actually be able to copy any of the files without their software. But the other thing that's really interesting with it is that they all have SIM cards, and the data gets uploaded to the Axon cloud or something like that, which is really interesting. But what's crazy is it allows for live streaming of the video. I don't know all of the exact like metrics for it, but because it is essentially geared to first responders, it has priority on like the LTE towers. So this streaming of the quality or the latency of the video is like near almost real time. I wasn't actually able to see that because there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't be able to see that. But the person that had this device was talking about it because they work at Axon, and that's just, it's really cool. Also, another really cool thing with the Axon cameras is that when someone starts recording, like they have to tap the device in order to start a recording. And if there are other Axon cameras in the vicinity, they all start recording. And then my question was, okay, well, how is it doing this? Is it like a Bluetooth signal? They weren't sure exactly how that portion worked because that's not their department. But effectively, if it is a Bluetooth signal, my next question is, well, could you intercept that signal? And if you have that signal intercepted, could you just replay it and just constantly do this to cause all Axon cameras to constantly just start recording? There was no official answer to that. But yeah, these things literally run Linux and you can like SSH into them. They would not comment on whether or not they reuse the same username and password across all devices. I hope they don't. I suspect that they don't because this is used by first responders and that would be like a giant security risk. But it does make sense why the devices are all encrypted because like that could be a bunch of sensitive data. But yeah, it was really cool because I've never really thought about it, but it was just really cool to see one of those in real life. The entire event was a heck of a lot of fun. Yes, it was definitely a much smaller scale than VMware Explore, but it definitely felt more intimate where it was less overwhelming, where there was just session after session after session. And like on one of the days at VMware Explore, there was a day that I just didn't even stop for lunch because there was just too many sessions that I wanted to attend. And there was less pressure, I feel, with EUC World independence. And I really liked that. And it just felt more connected to the people that were here, and you could just have more casual conversations. If you work or deal with the EUC space, I highly recommend that you check out World of EUC, which is the organization that put on EUC World Independence. And they are going to put on another EUC World in 2025. What exactly it will be called, if it will be called Independence, if it will be called Independence Day Part 2, I don't know. But all of those details on exactly when and where they still need to work that out because literally the event is just ending now. So of course they don't know those details yet. Do you deal with the EUC space? Let me know in the comments below. There was a bunch of us that were at the hotel bar. We were all talking about, literally we were all talking about AI and different ways to do models and different ways to do GPTs and different ways to do everything. And it was an epically fun experience. It was honestly a lot of fun because there was a lot of great conversations that came out of it and a lot of great learnings that came out of it. Tomorrow is going to be a travel day for me as I will be traveling back to Calgary with my friend Steven. I have finally made it home again after my adventures at EUC World 2024, also known as EUC World Independence. For my flight home, I was actually upgraded to business class, which is super cool because I've never flown business class before. And the plane that I was on, I believe, is referred to as a Dreamliner, and business class had these like pod things where it's like this individual seat that each person has, and like you can literally recline the entire chair fully flat, and you get like a pillow, you get like a blanket, you get your own personalized TV, and you get free food, and you get all of this stuff. And like, I've never flown business class before, and holy smokes, is it luxurious. I really enjoyed that. It was so much fun. And now I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to go back to the normal flights, but like, it is not cost effective to always fly business class. This just happened to be something that I was able to do. And I think that pretty much sums up my EUC World 2024, also known as EUC World Independence adventure. I had so much fun, met a ton of people, and learned a lot, and realized I haven't even scratched the surface when it comes to the world of EUC. That sentence was not intentional. I mean, like, in the realm of EUC things, I have barely scratched the surface there. In the comments below, let me know. Have you ever heard of World of EUC before? Were you at EUC World 2024? Would you go to an EUC World? Let me know all in the comments below. I think that pretty much sums up this video. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time, and don't forget to have an epically awesome day. Bye!